Okay, so cool. The last few talks have all been about what to aim for over the medium term. And now we're going to focus a bit more on the first couple of jobs after you graduate. What's best to do while you're still in your 20s? So a lot of careers advice says work out what your skills are, then try to find a job that matches those skills. But many people early in their career come to us and say, I'm just not sure I have any skills. And you know what? They're right. You just spent 3 years studying Descartes, quantum physics, and Moby Dick, and it's very unlikely that any future job is going to involve any of those things. So then what to do about it? Well, the obvious answer is if you don't have any skills, then go and get some. If you think of your career over a 40-year period, it makes sense spending some time at the start to really invest in yourself, and then use that over the rest of your career. And this still applies even if you've already done a graduate degree. Often this process of skilling up might last into your early 30s. In particular, many people we've advised have really felt they've learned a lot from their first couple of jobs. It's really kind of different, it's like a real step up from just being at university. Now this advice, invest in yourself, build skills, also sounds pretty obvious, but again, it's not what a lot of people do. So when we think of making a difference, the first thing that comes to mind often is a non-profit job. But we went to ask a lot of people who'd run really effective non-profits, would you recommend starting your career in the non-profit sector? And all of them said no. They don't want to hire people who've worked in the non-profit sector. They would want to hire people from the corporate sector. Some of them were even so strident in their criticism that they wouldn't let us publish it, even anonymously. One of the reasons for this is a lot of non-profits are very small. They don't have much spare budget for training. They're often a bit inefficient, and that means they don't give you as much skill development as you can get in other jobs. Another classic example of a path that people go down and then end up regretting is arts PhDs. The reason this doesn't work out is that many people go down and then they start the path, but they realize that they hate academia and they don't want a job in it. And this is surprisingly common. Then they also realize that doing an arts PhD hasn't really advanced their career in any other domain besides academia. So they've basically spent 4 or 5 years and not got that much to show for it, except for maybe they had a fun time while they were doing it. So this is an example. Chris, who did a philosophy PhD, he didn't want to go into any of the philosophy academia jobs he got offered, so then he wasn't sure what to do. But fortunately, he managed to retrain as a software engineer, learn programming, and now he works as a software engineer doing earning to give. This isn't actually a picture of Chris, it's just the first Google result for random white guy. I didn't have time to prep this talk properly. So our advice is not to do this, but instead to focus on building flexible career capital. So career capital is anything that puts you in a better position to make a difference in the future. Focus on doing this until you stop finding good opportunities to really invest in yourself. And that means you might still be focused on career capital into your 30s, and very likely for your first couple of jobs. The examples I just mentioned also show the importance of getting career capital that's flexible. And by that I mean career capital that can be used in many different careers. The reason for that is that many industries won't even exist in 20 to 30 years. So you're not just going to make a kind of 20-year plan and go for that. Instead, you need to get skills that are going to be useful in many different careers, even ones that haven't been invented yet. The more uncertain you are about the future and what you want to do, the more important flexibility is. A philosophy PhD or a non-profit job don't do as much to build your options. One aside here is don't necessarily think in terms of keeping options open, not closing any doors. Rather think in terms of committing to something that will get you flexible career capital. And so what is flexible career capital? We break it down into these factors. One is having valuable transferable skills. And the other is how many connections you have. So how many people are willing to help you out with something and how influential are they? Your credentials is your ability to prove your abilities to people. It doesn't necessarily have to be formal credentials. It could also just be some impressive achievements you can mention to people. And then we've got your character, your ability to do the right thing and figure out what that is under difficult circumstances. And then finally, what we call your runway, which is basically how long you could live if you didn't have any income. And so we recommend trying to build up 12 to 24 months of savings such that you could go for that long in relative comfort even if you lost your job. It just gives you a lot of flexibility and security. If your parents would support you indefinitely, then you have indefinite runway, but other people will have to save. Okay, so now how to get the best career capital, and go through a couple of concrete ways to do it. So the first broad category is kind of prerequisite to everything else, right? And I just sum that up as taking care of yourself. If there's anything you can do to deal with the basics, then it's just really worth sorting out. This is particularly true while you're a student and you have a lot of time to figure out how you're going to do these kinds of things. So these things, exercise, sleep, diet, friendships, they're the real drivers of how happy you feel and how productive you are day to day. Among our age group these days, due to the absolutely giant increase in the rates of depression in the last couple of decades, around 20% of us will go through a mental health problem this year and will struggle with mental health. So another kind of broad category of thing is, if that's you, then it's really worth just trying to spend some time doing what you can about that. And again, university is a particularly good time because there's a lot of free services available. Another thing to be aware of is online cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which is much cheaper and more flexible than seeing a therapist, but has quite a good evidence base for a whole bunch of conditions. And then the final category I've put in here is taking advantage of some of the discoveries of positive psychology that we talked about in the very first talk. There's a lot that's being discovered about how to be happy day to day. Just kind of a really simple example that has a significant boost to happiness is called gratitude journaling, which is just at the end of every day, note down one or two things that you were grateful for that day. And this actually has been shown in randomized control trials to make people happier over the long term. Okay, and then another similar thing in this area is what I say, invest in general productivity. So there's various things which make you pretty much more effective no matter what you're working on. And when you're really uncertain about what you want to do, then it really makes sense to invest in those things because they're going to be useful in whatever future career you take. So one really simple example of this is called the Pomodoro technique, which is just when you need to do some focused work, you set a 25-minute timer and you work on nothing else except for that, and then you take a 5-minute break. And this sounds insanely simple, but I have a bunch of friends for whom it's completely changed their productivity, because before they would just check Facebook constantly and could never really focus. And just this really simple device really helped them. Another example is just learning how to learn. No matter what you're going to have to do in the future, you're going to have to learn a lot of new skills. And it's possible to study more efficiently or less efficiently. The most viewed MOOC of all time is called Learning How to Learn on Coursera. And that's a really awesome course. And that would be a great thing to look through, especially while you're at university and you have to do a lot of studying. There's lots more ideas in the notes. Okay, so those are some kind of prerequisites, things which are particularly good to focus on while at university. What about in terms of jobs? How do you get the best career capital? So one general category, joining any organization that has a reputation for high performance. And I've just put some examples here. Many things in the tech sector, consulting, certain parts of finance, the civil service fast stream, Teach First, anywhere you can work with a great mentor. These are the kinds of jobs that really force you to up your game and you can learn a lot within. And also impressive credentials to other people. So just quickly think, could any of these be options for you? Then there's certain graduate studies. Some graduate studies are good because they let you have the option of going into academia, but if you decide that's not for you, then they also have lots of good backup options. And so those ones are much more kind of general purpose recommendations. You can kind of go into them and be relatively safe. Particularly highlight in that category anything to do with applied maths, computer science, economics. Economics might actually be the best graduate program in that basically everyone who does an economics PhD can get a job in economics if they want. They have an extremely effective job market, which might be what you hope from economists. They managed to get that right. And there's also a lot of great backup options in policy or in the corporate sector or whatever. So also you can move from economics into all the other social sciences, but not vice versa. So it's much more flexible than many graduate qualifications. So yeah, if you could do an economics PhD, then that's really worth considering. Also, it is possible to retrain, especially if you've done something involving maths before. You just might have to take a year or two brushing up on your math skills. Other graduate studies can make sense, but you need to be more confident that you're going to use them in the future. So if you're relatively confident you want to become a history academic, then a history PhD could make sense. But don't just go and do a PhD, even if you think there's a good chance you won't want to become an academic. It's probably something better you could do for career capital. And then many other areas just require graduate studies. So if you want to work in a think tank, you basically need a master's in a relevant area. Fifth one, anything that helps you learn a valuable transferable skill. So we saw the story of Chris earlier, who went from philosophy to programming. He did that through a programming bootcamp. These are a 3-month program which have really taken off in the last few years, where they just try to train you in programming as quickly as possible. Some of them even are free to attend, but then you have to pay back your salary only if you get a job after it. So it's a pretty good proposition. They have very high placement rates. This is just because the demand for software engineers has absolutely taken off in the last 5 or 10 years. There's actually a free programming bootcamp in London called Founders and Coders, which some people we've advised have gone on and found really good. A similar thing is now there's data science bootcamps coming along. Data science is kind of a combination of being a programmer and being a statistician. And it's a particularly good option if you've already got a science PhD but you don't want to continue in academia. Then data science bootcamps exist to basically take people in that situation and train them up as quickly as possible. And there's another really good one in London. And then finally, I put marketing. Huge range of organizations need marketing. It's kind of a growing area. And so if you really get that skill, then you can apply it in lots of different areas in the future. And to do that, it would be more about trying to work in an organization where you get to work under someone who's really good at marketing. And then the final area, just doing something that sounds impressive. And this gets you into the gray area of career capital hacks. So founding something often gets you a lot of kudos. So if you're a student, you could think of founding a student society. Being the best at something, even if it's not that competitive, sounds much more impressive than being somewhat good at something that's very competitive. Publishing a book is easier than people think because of self-publishing. And getting published in a major newspaper is also a lot easier than it used to be 10 years ago. It's much harder to get paid to write these days, but it's much easier to get published. And so this is all stuff that can help you get the kind of credentials part of career capital. Okay, so this was the complete list of everything we went through. Just a few seconds to think, does anything within these categories apply to you? Could they be a good option for you? If so, write them down.